of Johannesburg. Dr. Vashna Jagarnath, good morning to you and welcome to the show.
Good morning, Inayat. Thanks for having me.
Well, wonderful having you as always. Now, Dr. Vashna, let's talk about 73 years of independence.
Mhm.
Now, India, we know, has been a country that has fought for its independence at a huge cost to the country, to its people. And 73 years later, boasting about being the world's largest democracy, and we look at recent developments, the ongoing Indian farmer strike yesterday, we saw how brutal and how violent it actually became, but also the whole question surrounding democracy and what is termed as Hindu nationalism, which is very, very prevalent in the country.
Yes, I think that I think at any point since 1948, India claiming to be the world's largest democracy has always been contentious, given that in a bourgeois democracy state, majority of people who don't have access to wealth or to any form, then lack any form of redress because the way the system is set up. And that's not just true of India. I think it's true of many democracies in the world that operate in that way. Even if you think about South Africa, we might have one of the most liberal constitutions in the world, but we still have a very high rate of, human rights violations, people not being able to access basic goods such as food, stuff, basic commodities, basic services such as education, healthcare, and so on. So I think India has been suffering from that for the last 70, 80 years. But in the last 10 years, it's clearly gotten much worse. And any project to try and build a constitutional democracy in India has been eaten away and hollowed out by the efforts of the BJP and in particular by Narendra Modi and the Hindu right and the Hindutva that has now come to really dominate the public sphere of India as well as the political power of India. We've seen this happen. First, it began, within the student movement in India, where the universities were taken control by sort of Hindu right academics, people in the service of the Hindu right nationalist narrative. And you found the sidelining of many progressive academics in those spaces. It had a huge repercussion within the education system. And you must know that that's the first area that fascists usually try to get hold of, or any sort of authoritarian project to smash out any dissent. Because as we all know, it's from the student movements usually that the most radical dissent tends to come from. In addition to that, what you have had now in recent times is even before the Farmers' Bill, you've had the attack of minorities. You've had the physical and violent attack of minorities, as we have seen several times. You've also had the passing of the CAA Bill, which then attacks many sort of vulnerable communities who are regarded to be outside of the Hindu narrative of India as well. And now what you have is the violation and the sort of limitation of the power of people who produce food. So, and communities who produce food who are outside of what's seen as the dominant Hindu groupings within India. You first saw the attacks on people who eat, consume, and also take care of livestock, such as the beef ban in India. That dealt very significant blows to the economy of the Muslim community and the Dalit community in India. And now you have a similar thing with the Indian farm bills, where it's going to have a significant blow in one particular state. It affects farmers across India, but particularly in the Punjab, which is known as the breadbasket of India. So what has happened is there's been this sustained attack on any form of liberal and democratic rights from the education sectors. Now it's dealing with the food sectors. It's done through violence, and also it's done through discourse. I mean, yesterday when they had the march and their sort of processions through Delhi, and the truck drivers from around India were trying to get in, they weren't allowed in. That was what sparked the violence. But what you also had was this horrendous image of this huge sort of, all I could say was a Brahmin, like a sort of generalized version of a Brahmin priest sitting on this float. And that is a very particular version of a Brahminical Hinduism that is based on deep discrimination. And that was part of a supposedly secular society's Independence Day. And I think that in itself sort of encompasses how much the vision of the people who fought for independence for India, the early leaders of the independent Indian state, how far their vision has been hollowed out and turned backwards rather than progressing.
Well, certainly, and in the true sense, can we really call this independence? And is there any real reason or any cause to celebrate after what you've just described, what has been taking place, particularly in the last 10 years and over a period of time? And at the same time, as India obviously marked independence, one cannot forget that there are others that are calling out for independence as well. And when one looks at the Indian involvement in Kashmir, for instance, because we've got the Kashmiris that have been crying out for independence for close on to well over 70 years as well.
Exactly. I mean, I think that we have to really consider when states are declared independent in a particular way, it takes a really long time for everyone to accept that actually the mechanisms of the state and how the state functions is not independent, and how the state functions is not democratic. And I think we take a long time to do that because we often tend to buy into the rhetoric of politics rather than actually what is happening in politics, and actually how state and power function in society, and the ways in which people who are poor, working class and marginal, and who are on the margins of political power in society, the ways in which their demands are left out. And usually they tend to be the majority of society, not the minority. So in India, what really fascinated me last year when those anti-immigration bills were passed in India was the ways in which Indians all of a sudden within India who were now going to be affected by this became very upset, but for years have been very silent on the Kashmiri matter because it didn't actually affect them. Right? And what you do as a state externally, you will also begin to do internally to your own state. And we've seen this throughout history. And what is happening in India should be a very, very big warning to us all over the world. As the world is moving more towards the right, as there's a buildup of more conservative politics, as we see states becoming more and more repressive. I mean, in South Africa, for example, the South African state, as part of the sort of COVID-19 measures, have also banned any political gatherings of any political organizations and parties. However, when you find that the ANC is meeting for funerals, masked or unmasked, they seem to be fine to do that and create a political statement around that. So there's all of these moves throughout society. And I think it's not just in India that we should be asking these questions. I think we should be asking them even about our own society. It's just that in India, it's so overt and crass at the moment, like it was during Trump's power in America. But it doesn't mean that now Joe Biden is there, that all of a sudden the people who are migrants, the people who are left out in the majority, their lives are going to get any better.
Well, I think what you say is very, very interesting, and looking at ourselves in South Africa as well, because on Monday I had a discussion with a legal expert, just looking at South Africa, looking at the disaster management regulations and how draconian and how individuals are given power to make regulations. And, on the other hand, you've got a legal system, you've got a constitution, in terms of how laws are actually passed. But what happens is power is actually vested on in people to actually make these regulations, some of which are very, very draconian. And this is a danger, I think, that we not only us in South Africa are faced with, but in countries right across the entire world. Because if this is what COVID-19 has done, it's a scary thought, Dr. Vashna.
Yeah, it's absolutely scary. And I mean, even if you think about the Indian Farm Bill in India right now, that's completely unconstitutional because the Indian national state, for example, cannot interfere in local states' policies, especially around farming, because the idea is that farming and agriculture in different states are different, given the landscape, the geography, the peasant communities, and so on. But the Indian state has acted completely unconstitutionally in passing this bill. And no one is also mentioning that fact. And what happens is over time, there's an eating away of your constitution because we are not active as citizens. We are not politically active as people all the time. And you don't blame us. We're exhausted. I mean, now people are suffering financially in the worst ways from COVID-19. They are merely trying to get by. But at the same time, the state, the organ of the state is not a neutral power. It's a power that works in particular interests. And it's so fascinating the ways in which COVID-19 has demonstrated this and demonstrated how the state and who holds power in the state is not people. We can vote every 4 years, but we don't actually hold that power. We then are seceding our rights up to a state that effectively runs in the interest of the elites. You had a speaker on earlier on who was talking about the billionaires accessing vaccines. I mean, that is completely outrageous. It's not just the billionaires. Today, the European Union and Angela Merkel wants to close off the exportation of vaccines to any other part of the world. The powerful and the rich can do this because the state is always working in their interest. And I think when there's a disaster in society, when the state is not functioning like it is in most parts of the world, then the powerful, instead of seceding power and giving it up so that we can build a more democratic, more inclusive, better society, what they tend to do is hold power through a politics of hate and discrimination, like you see what's happening in India, like you see what happened with Trump in the United States of America, and what's happening in parts of Europe, and also what's beginning to happen in South Africa now. I mean, our xenophobic attacks have been a sort of marker throughout the last 20 years, where people are being attacked. And even yesterday, once again, there were xenophobic attacks in KwaZulu-Natal, in Durban, and so on. So I think that the ways in which, if you go onto social media as well, it's completely distressing, as the amount of hate and the amount of ignorance that people are willing to believe, but also promote in the name of hate, in the name of discrimination, just to gain some little power, because we've been rendered so powerless in the system.
Well, Dr. Vashna Jagarnath, I know we would love to engage a lot more, but due to time constraints, obviously, we need to obviously call this interview to a halt. But as always, we thank you. We do appreciate your time. And I know you take time out to be with us here on Salam Media and to share your views and your analysis on these issues that we have been talking about. But all the best to you.
Yes.
Be safe and please stay healthy.
Yes, you too, Nayat. Thank you so much.
Dr. Vashna Jagarnath joining us this morning once again, and the time is just headed for 9:50 a.m. We come back, we look at thousands of teachers or education assistants that have not been paid by the Department of Basic Education.